Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business. I'm looking forward to talking about storytelling, master storytelling, actually, with Mark Carpenter, who's the CEO of Master Storytelling. Mark, it's great to connect with you. Thanks for taking time to be on Think Business. I appreciate it. I love talking about storytelling because I think everything is a story. And so I want to kind of jump right in. What makes a good story, Mark?
It's really interesting, and you're right. Stories are everywhere.
Yeah.
They're all around us. But the thing that makes a good story, to me, and the way we think about storytelling, is storytelling with a point. That you're actually got a purpose, some intention behind that. Story can mean a lot of different things. It can mean movies and books, and it can just be, hey, what's this person's story, or what happened to you at work today could be a story. But when we talk about storytelling in the book Master Storytelling, we talk about how to intentionally tell stories with a purpose to teach, lead, sell, and inspire. And so any good story is going to have three parts. It's going to have that kind of beginning, middle, end, where you're setting up the current state. You got some kind of conflict, and you've got some kind of change that comes at the end.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to get to having good intent in your story that makes an impact.
So you've just described every movie and TV show made, right? The beginning, right? The conflict, and then the change at the end. And so let's talk about, let's kind of break it up as a leader of a company, as an owner of a company, right? And then let's talk about, maybe any type of leader. Let's talk about a manager, and then let's talk about salespeople, right? And so what the formula is for leading people. Let's start there. So the formula for leading people in your setup, your conflict, your change. How does a leader communicate to increase their influence, increase the message so it's received, it's connectable, and all of that?
Yeah, well, storytelling is how we make sense of the world.
Right.
And so the leader, think about that. If whatever principle you're trying to get across, and whether it's I need people to understand where our sales numbers currently are, or I need people to understand even just where our business metrics and KPIs are. You can give them the information, but stories will help them make sense of that.
Right.
So the stories show this is the impact that this shift in our numbers is going to have, or this is the potential impact if we step up and improve these metrics. This is what it's going to do for us. This is what it's going to do for the people that we serve. And so from a leadership standpoint, think about stories as a way to help your people make sense of the world and connect with you as a leader so they want to follow you more.
Yeah. So let's talk about, that kind of, I think, falls in line with, leaders and managers. But what about using storytelling in sales?
Yeah. We in sales, we tend to fall into a trap of talking about features. Our product, our service has this, and this, and it has all these cool things that are in it. Unless you tell the story that makes sense to the other person about why that's important to them, what it means to them, they're not going to relate to that. They're not going to have any energy behind why they should buy from you.
Yeah.
And so we talk about, okay, we'll get to the benefits. Here's the benefits of it. But sometimes people need that translation of what those benefits look like to them.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to buy from me and I can tell you a story of somebody similar to you and the benefit that they got from my product or service, it's going to heighten your awareness a little bit more.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. I'm a business coach. I work with salespeople, managers, C-level execs, solopreneurs to Fortune companies. And I work with people who are successful and are stuck, and I get them unstuck. And I think sometimes where people get stuck in a story, especially from a sales person, is they're telling what they think is a story, but they're really just listing features. And so the person they're talking to doesn't know what that means to them. The same, I find that managers, they're not telling the story and connecting on why they do something and where it connects to the vision and what their small piece means in the story, right? And sometimes I find when I coach leaders is they're so overwhelmed, they don't even know what story people want to hear because they're a little disconnected. So let's kind of, I'd like your insight on how, regardless of what the position is, how you connect more deeply with people, right? When do people zone out? How many seconds do you have before you lose their attention? Take us there.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say, Jon, is that sometimes we get caught up in what we know.
Correct.
And we know it so clearly. Chip and Dan Heath refer to this in the book Made to Stick as the curse of knowledge. I know this is so clear and obvious to me that I'm explaining it to you from my perspective, but it's not as clear and obvious to you. So I don't understand why you can't get it.
So let's talk about the curse of knowledge. Think community. You've heard me talk about the curse of knowledge. I'm so glad you brought that up. The curse of knowledge is where you may know it on a scale from 1 to 10 of 10. People really buy it at 2 to 3. Right. Yeah. Or they receive it and understand it at a 2, maybe a 3. Once you go above that, you're losing people. One of the things I do as a business coach, Mark, is I do my best to break things down into simplicity. It's very common. A client will say to me, Jon, you make it sound so simple. And sometimes I'll say, well, it kind of is, right? Don't complicate it. And so how do you stay? Let's focus on this curse of knowledge. How do you stay at a 2 or a 3 in your story? And I just want to say one thing. Think community. If you look at any movie or TV show, when they keep it at a 2 to a 3, unless it's a documentary, your attention's there. Once they go off to the 5, 6, 7, they're putting in 900 characters, too many plot themes. You're turning off the show.
Yeah, right on. And you hit on the major point that I wanted to make there, and that's remember that the story is not about you.
Correct.
The story's about them.
Right.
And so you have to think of it from the perspective of what's going to connect to them. I do a lot of teaching, a lot of facilitating, and I've got a bank of stories just packed into my head. But I always think in terms of, all right, where are they? Because that's going to help me determine which story that I'm going to use, because that's going to get it to their level. So think in terms of where they are. Let me give you a classic example.
I just want to add one thing: where they are and where they want to go.
Yeah. And so it's the pain that they're experiencing and the pain that you can help alleviate for them.
Right.
And so the story needs to get to that. Yeah. I talked about getting to that change in the story. And that's the change that you want to show, is that we've helped other people go from the pain that you're having to the change that you want.
Right.
And if they can see that, their minds and hearts are going to be opened more.
Yeah.
People buy from those that they know, trust, and like. And storytelling is a great way to get people to know, trust, and like you. And you can do it in a fairly simple way. You've referenced movies a couple of times. This is one of the objections I get from people. I don't have time to give this epic tale. That's not what I'm talking about. You can do this in a couple of quick minutes.
Yeah.
And if you catch them at the beginning with the thing that they care about, you've got them for that 2 minutes to bring them to that change point.
Yeah. Let's rewind what you just said a little bit more, because, as somebody who I speak, I do keynotes, I coach hundreds of people all over the globe. And one of the things I find is, even if you're like, I'll talk about some keynotes, right? Keynotes or presentations or trainings that I'll do. When I get there early and start talking to people, what I thought they wanted and what they thought they wanted, because of maybe where they are in the, kind of like a retreat or, a 3-day, et cetera, annual event, it has changed a little bit. And so by the questions that you ask as the storyteller, talk about how you need to kind of, pull an audible and course correct in real time, kind of what you're going to, how the story is told.
Yeah. And this is where you need to look for and just collect that bank of stories that I was talking about.
Right.
I'll go to a sales example. Let's say that somebody raises an objection. It's just not the right time for us. Well, of course, you're gonna probe a little more and say, okay, why is it not the right time for you? What are the barriers you're experiencing right now? Well, that's going to trigger you to say, okay, I've had somebody that had that same barrier,
right?
And they paid for it by not taking the steps forward, by not overcoming those barriers. Right. Well, and that's the story I want to tell to that person. Right. But I don't want to pull out a story that has something totally disconnected to their barrier, because that's not going to resonate with them. And it's going to seem to them like you're not really listening to them. That's where the story becomes more about you than about them. And
what I always talk about when I'm talking to clients, because I talk about storytelling a lot, is if you want to be able to tell things through other people's lenses, not yours, because it puts people in the story. When people can put themselves in the story, then they can connect to the story on a much deeper level.
Yeah, when they can connect to the story, it becomes a vicarious experience for them.
Right.
It's like they're experiencing it there alongside you.
Right.
And having that experience and learning that lesson along the way.
Right.
And so that's the key that you want to have there, is to make that relatability to them and their life and their situation,
right,
so that you can walk them along that story to the change that you want them to get to.
I love it. Let's dive into the book. Somebody who reads this book, give us kind of like the 1 minute Reader's Digest of the book and what they'll get from it, Mark.
Okay, you're going to learn why stories are important, why stories work. So we get into some of the brain science around why storytelling is impactful in business. We're going to talk about where do you find these stories in your life, and then we're going to talk about how do you structure that. How do you take an experience and actually turn it into a story? Because those are two different things. We'll go into some details, some nuanced details about making those stories powerful. And then we'll talk about how to get better at that skill of storytelling. Great. Of course, all along the way, we give you a lot of examples, a lot of illustrations. A book on storytelling has got to be filled with stories, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of examples of those things along the way.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's rewind a little bit again. What's your story? Nobody's story is a straight line. So, give us the 1 to 2 minute version and go back as far as you can on the mentor or the storyteller early on in your life that got you to kind of where you are today.
Okay, so I'll go back to college. The professors that resonated with me the most were not the professors that said, here's a bunch of information you need to memorize and learn. They were the professors that put things in context for me by telling a story. And my initial career was in public relations and marketing communications, and that's a bunch of storytelling where we're trying to make the connection between audience and the business. And then I transitioned from there into teaching and facilitating. I taught at university for a while as an adjunct professor in communications, and I applied those things that were important to me. This is how you tell the story to make the point. Yeah. And then as you get into facilitating content, storytelling is a great way to do that. And I watched the people who were really good at making those connections between those real life experiences and the content or the concept they wanted to teach to people. Yeah. And I practiced that. And then a good colleague of mine who was also in training and facilitation, Daryl Harmon, he and I co-wrote the book together. And we got into it, to the details of why that works. And it was fascinating to see that there's actually some science behind what I was doing fairly naturally.
It's great. It's great. I always love that too. And, as a business coach, all the books and the things and the life experience and the this, and I start doing something or thinking of something, and then I'll read a book and they talk about the science of it. And I'm like, and at night it's nice because it kind of redefines it in a way for me. And I think, oh, okay, that's why this is working, or that's why this isn't working. So I love learning the science after it's kind of, after the fact, and then how it can
confirming and affirming.
Correct. Correct. Right.
There's a reason that these things are working. It's not just it feels like they're working.
Right.
And then you can be more intentional about it.
Correct.
And that's one of the things we talk about in Master Storytelling a lot, is be intentional about how you tell the story and what story you're telling to whom.
Yeah. And I'll say one thing too. One of the things I see as I coach people, and this is a universal thing, Mark, is, people don't prepare enough the story. They'll go, and whether it's one person pitching something or a team of people pitching something, they all kind of, like, it seems the majority of people too often run into the meeting winging it, right? So they're not. And so think community, it's really, really important. Spend some time and make it part of your routine that as a team or as an individual, you really are prepping for the meeting. The stories that you need to pull from, or you have 5 stories that you may only pull one during the presentation, but they need to be part of your knowledge base in case you need them. So I love everything we're talking about today. Mark, quick speed round. In the spirit of story, what's one of your favorite books that's had the biggest impact on you?
Oh man, you're always making me narrow it to one, don't you? So I'm going to go with Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. That book changed the way I think about how I communicate with people, how I talk to people. There's also some great stories and great examples in there about the impact of communicating effectively in tough situations.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received. That's a great book, by the way. I do love that book. What's best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
I'm going back to my college days with this one too. I wrote a LinkedIn article about this just a little while ago. One of my college professors said, you're going to face emergencies. You're going to face crisis times. You're going to face times where you have to get things done fast. And just remember these words: hurry, but don't panic.
Wait, say it again. You broke up for a minute.
Hurry, but don't panic. Move fast.
That's a really good one.
Move fast with intentionality. Yeah. Don't get into panic mode, because that's where you're going to make mistakes. That's where you're going to create problems for yourself. So hurry, but don't panic.
I'm going to steal that, Mark. That's a great one. All right, and finish this sentence. One thing everybody can do to be a better storyteller today is
be intentional. It's just be intentional about what stories you're telling. And help your team be intentional with that too, because when you're intentional about it, you're going to think about the person who's listening to the story more than about yourself.
I love it.
And so get your team together and talk together about what are the stories we need for these situations as we're talking to clients, as these situations as we're talking to prospects.
Yeah.
And just be intentional about that. You mentioned before, a lot of people step into things and just wing it.
Yeah.
Intentionality is the opposite of winging it.
Yeah.
And so be intentional about how you use storytelling.
I love it. Mark, I can't thank you enough. This was great. I love talking about storytelling. We'll have to have you back again to talk about it some more. Think community. For those of you who listen to the show, you know I talk about storytelling a lot. It is one of the most powerful tools that we can use in all elements of business. So I loved our talk. You talked about a lot of things. I'm a business coach. I work with successful people who are stuck and get them unstuck. When you become a better storyteller, you get unstuck faster. And Mark, you shared a lot of nuggets, and I'm going to echo your final words, which are: think community, be intentional, and take time to prepare. Right. I find myself when I'm doing, we talked earlier about, when I'm doing keynotes or trainings, I prepare so much that it looks like I'm winging it. And so you need to spend time preparing. Mark, tell everybody where they can buy your book and how they can connect with you.
Book is available on Amazon in all the different formats. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you look for Mark Carpenter and Master Storytelling, you'll find me on LinkedIn, or through our website at master-storytelling.com. You got to get that little dash between master and storytelling.
Got to get the dash.
And you'll find us.
Yeah. Mark, thanks so much. I appreciate you taking time to be on the show. Think community, thank you for listening. And if you can need anything from me, please connect with me at jondwoskin.com. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, John.